President Donald Trump is pushing researchers and forcing an industry-wide shift into decentralized science. We're going to talk about some of the executive orders and some of the decisions that Trump has made right now in the last couple of days, which are going to have massive implications, including potentially naming RFK as the National Health Secretary, the United States leaving the WHO or the World Health Organization, funding freeze for the NIH, and funding freeze for all government grants as a whole. This is massive steps. These have a lot of implications. We'll talk about them. We'll touch on some of these topics and how I think it's going to impact decentralized science. Spoiler, I think it's kind of bullish, but it is very turbulent, very aggressive, and kind of jarring in the very beginning, or at least in the potential near term. Now, a fantastic post kind of outlining why people need to be paying attention to this from Poseidon DAO and highlighting some of the things I want to talk about before we get into the others. So why Poseidon DAO is more critical than ever for the future of science. This week, US science funding faces an unprecedented crisis. NIH grant reviews are frozen, halting billions in research funding. Early career researchers and transformative projects are left in limbo. We need solutions right now. The current system for funding science is centralized, biased, and inefficient. Political influences, inequalities, and funding delays hurt innovation and stall critical research. These are all talking points we've been talking about for years at this point as it pertains to decentralized science, because we make content on decentralized science every single day. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this type of content. If you do, hit that thumbs up on the video. But this is why Poseidon DAO and all of decentralized science is so crucial. Using blockchain, we're cutting out inefficiencies, democratizing decisions, and directly empowering scientists. Why does it matter specifically for Poseidon DAO? They do personalized medical research. It's urgently needed for diseases like cancer, MS, Alzheimer's, and more. These therapies can save lives, but traditional funding mechanisms can't keep up. And straight up right now, they no longer exist, at least for the time being. We even saw Andrew Huberman come out and make comments about this because, well, it is earth-shattering what's going on. The fact that he froze NIH funding is nuts. But my phone's been blowing up my phone has been blowing up about this NIH freeze. Here are my predictions again. 1, indirect payments will be cut to a flat rate. 2, overall budget won't change. With number 1, that means more grants. And 3, work deemed derivative gets axed. Money, resumes, once new leadership confirmed is his 4th point there. So what does he actually mean by this? You might ask, who decides what's derivative? He cannot comment on this. He has held and reviewed NIH grants for decades. There is too much overlap of topics, but basic research implications for medicine are hard to predict. A shift towards more gutsy and safe research and more away from BS legacy funding based on friends on study section needs to go. So what he's saying right there is he's highlighting and outlining the inefficiencies and the flaws in the current funding model for grants for academia, meaning that right now a lot of the money will go in lump sums to friends of friends who make the decision. And what he's saying is that you need to actually go and start funding more research with maybe potentially smaller grant sizes, but that this freeze is giving them time, giving the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, time to go in and audit some of the spending and everything to see if it's going towards just random nonsense or if it's going to actual implications or like real life research, things that are actually going to matter. To be clear, I think most all reviewers acting in good faith, but there's a sociology to the process, and in the last decade, it really hurt young investigators. I say this from the perspective of someone who never really had too much trouble getting my grants. I had a lot of private funding, but he sympathizes heavily with the new generation of scientists as they spend too much time trying to raise funds compared to actually doing the science, right? I feel like an echo chamber. I've been saying this for years. Everyone's been saying this. This is not something that's hidden at all. Hence why Trump is coming in and saying, hold up, we need to cut back on spending. I'm not just going to cut back on spending overseas, but also internally. We need to cut back and be more efficient with the money that we're spending. It's going to cause turbulence in the short term, but the long term, it is driving people towards funding alternatives. You see it right here. Andrew Huberman, one of the most prolific scientists, researchers in on social media, right? Because he also makes social media content around everything that he does. He got most of his funding through private grants, not government grants. And that is where decentralized science comes into play. With different DeSci projects, most of the focus is on funding and actually raising funds and giving it to researchers so that they can conduct their research. It is the solution. And it honestly, my point that I'm trying to make right here is that researchers right now are Googling frantically, how do I get funding for my research? And if any of the DeSci projects have done good SEO and SEM, they're going to pop up, and it should draw in a new wave of people into decentralized science. In a little bit more details, I want to talk about Trump bringing in RFK potentially as the nation's health secretary. He says it would be much less radical than you would think, but the new administration's first round of health policies moves have been alarming physicians and public health experts on both sides of the aisle. With RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing now scheduled for Wednesday, here are 4 worrying developments that stood out amid the personal chaos and ambiguity. Oh my God, my words are not flowing super smooth right now. All 4 of these articles I'm about to show you are all very biased, and they do not hesitate to let their opinion in. I'm also going to be very biased and not hesitate to let my opinion in. I'm not paying to view an article on this. Objectively speaking, RFK is healthier than our previous public health administrator. Yeah, I'm a big fan of RFK. I stand with a lot of his thoughts on actually looking at what the research says and actually following what the science is telling us to follow, rather than just funding random things and following what big corporations force us to follow. I know he's viewed as a conspiracy theorist, but if you actually listen to what he's saying, apart from that voice that he's got, if you actually listen to him, he is very intelligent, and he's been through the trenches, guys. He has been through the ringer as it pertains to health implications. Dude was addicted to heroin. Dude had a brain worm. Dude has a vocal impairment because of something else that happened to him. He has had a lot of battles with health, and now he's making it he made it his personal mission decades ago to actually try and help people get out of those ailments. Now, on to the next thing. Enough about him, because that is whatever. But what's actually happening right now is huge. So the US exits the World Health Organization, what this means for global healthcare. So for decades, the United States held considerable power in determining the direction of the global health policies and programs. President Trump issued 3 executive orders on his first day in office that may signal the end of that era. We are stepping out of the WHO. Now, the WHO sets a lot of the different standards for how the world is going to deal with public health crises, just like the pandemic and other things, right? They kind of set the tone on what the attention is from the globe on healthcare, public health. And so the United States pulling back some of the funding because Trump viewed it as too much funding compared to other countries, as if the United States was funding all of the efforts, or at least a majority of it, and he wanted other countries to pull their weight in it. While I understand what he's saying, it does, based off of how things like this function, the United States funding most of it means the United States gets to make a lot of those decisions, or at least impact more than some of the other countries. So I don't know how I feel about this one, but it's funding that's getting cut. All right, that's the key thing. Funding that's getting cut. I did highlight one key section down here. Okay, so once the US is absent, for better or for worse, there will be less pressure on certain positions, Moon said. In the pandemic agreement negotiations, we may see weakening opposition towards more public health orientated approaches to intellectual property. This is a moment in geopolitical shift because the US is making itself less relevant, these people are saying. So one thing I want to highlight in here is the public health orientated approaches to intellectual property. What is decentralized science focused a lot on when it comes to funding that intellectual property? So it does bring into question, or at least makes me think, DeSci has to come in and fill some of this void, right? Decentralized science has to come in and do something here, at least maybe not in the immediate term, but in the longer term. We're seeing a shift closer and closer to decentralized science. Crazy. I'm like, crazy that this is happening. Crazy. Next thing up was never seen anything like this. Trump's team halts NIH meetings and travel. So they froze funds to the NIH, which is nuts. So typically the NIH awards research grants after 2 separate panels of independent specialists in a particular scientific field have reviewed project proposals, okay? So they have 2 panelists review a project proposal before they will give any funding to the scientist who's requesting money from the NIH, all right? Now we scroll down a little bit lower, you will see these panels, called study sections and advisory councils, are sometimes scheduled a year in advance and can include more than 30 participating researchers, so it will take time to reschedule and might result in a domino effect of cancellations. So they need 2 separate panels, and sometimes it can take a year to get actually viewed by that panel, which means you might have to wait 2 years before actually reviewing and seeing if your research will get that grant that you applied for. Holy shit, that is so much wasted time, guys. That is so much wasted time. Decentralized science, it can take you sometimes maybe 6 weeks to get funding. NIH, it might take you 2 years to get that funding. And they're like, we're going to have so many cancellations now. It's like, no, just speed up the process. Make it less inefficient. Speed it up. Decentralized science speeds it up. So some of these researchers should hopefully seek some funding alternatives in the world of decentralized science. The final point here is Trump's order on a temporary funding freeze that could affect trillions of dollars. This is all government grants, not just ones for the NIH. This is the whole government. All funding, so literally trillions of dollars in funding getting paused. I highlighted a section here as well. So this person wrote that each agency must complete a comprehensive analysis of all of their federal financial assistance programs to identify programs, projects, and activities that may be implicated by any of the president's executive orders. He also wrote that the pause should be implemented to the extent permissible under applicable law. So essentially, and this includes the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which distributes billions of dollars, confirmed that it would implement the pause to align federal spending and action with the will of the American people as expressed through President Trump's priorities. So what are we seeing? What are President Trump's priorities right now? Well, there's a lot of things, but to cut back spending, especially in those programs for DEI, diversity, inclusion, and I forget what I forget what it stands for, but you guys know what DEI is. I should have reminded myself DEI. So right here, okay, right here. Administration officials said the decision was necessary to ensure that all funding complies with Trump's executive orders, which are intended to undo progressive steps on transgender rights, environmental justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI efforts. I'll leave that for each and every one of you guys to have your own opinions on. Go ahead and put it down below in the comments of this video if you would. Do you think some of these cuts are good? Do you think some of these cuts are bad? Are you for Trump or are you against Trump? It doesn't really matter at this point because it's happening and the shift is driving people into decentralized science. They should at least start looking into alternatives because who knows how long it's going to take to actually audit all of these new systems and spending to get rid of inefficiencies. One thing that you cannot deny is that this image hits a little bit too hard right now. The official portrait of Donald J. Trump, the 47th president of the United States, has been released. First time playing the game, not knowing what the game is, versus second time playing the game, fully understanding the mission at hand. Will he succeed? Will he not succeed? Only time will tell. Speaking of time, it is your most valuable asset. So hopefully this was worth investing it into. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you in the next video.